Okay, our next task is going to be creating a reusable date input for our date field, and earlier on in this course we were using the HTML implementation of the date input. Now we can't really use that in any application because that relies on the browsers implementing the HTML5 date input in the same way, and they simply haven't done. They all implement it in a slightly different way, and some, Safari, I'm looking at you, haven't even bothered implementing it at all. So we still need to use JavaScript-based date pickers in our applications if we want a consistent look and feel across whatever browser the user is using. Now the one that I'm going for this particular course is called React Date Picker. And it's pretty good. The documentation, I'm going to say, is not brilliant, and it can be tricky to find what you're looking to achieve in here. It's all here, but I don't know. It's just not laid out in the way that I'd prefer to lay it out. But don't worry about the documentation. This is what it gives us. It gives us a date picker, but what this one also gives us is a time picker. And if we take a look at the options for this, then we can see in here we also get a date picker that allows us to select a time as well, which we need for our activities, and that's the reason for picking this particular date picker. So let's go and implement this, and of course we're going to need to install a package for this. So we'll go to our tab where we're using to install certain things, and we'll say npm install react-date picker and press return. And unfortunately this is another package that doesn't provide a type definition file, so we'll also need to go ahead and install the types for this as well. And there is a type available from the types, and the version of React Date Picker, by the way, is 3.3.0, and we'll also install the types as well. So I'll specify save-dev and press return. And this goes ahead and installs the types for this successfully. Slightly different version once again, but we don't need to worry about that. I promise you the types that we get from this are absolutely fine. And what we'll do is we'll go across to Solution Explorer, and once again we'll create another component in our form folder. So we'll say new file, and we'll say mydate input.tsx. And once again we'll just use as a starting point the code that we've got from the text input, and I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard and paste it in here and change text input to date input. Now the props for this are going to be slightly different. So what we'll do is we'll import date picker from React Date Picker, and what this also provides is some props that we can pass into our component. So we'll remove the label in this particular case. We won't deal with labels here. We'll just say date picker. And what we need in here is different properties. Now, the type definition file for date picker does provide us with props that we can use here. And instead of using the interface and props, what we'll do is we'll also import as a named input React Date Picker props. And if we go and press F12 to go and take a look at the different properties that we have available, then all of these props are going to be provided for us. Now all of these props are optional, so they've all got the question mark, but this gives us all of the different things that we can use with this particular date picker. Things like the date format, things like max date, min date, the name of the inputs. We've got all of our different events that we can use, the onChange event, the onBlur event, the onSelect event, and a lot of different props available inside here to configure our calendar. So that's pretty good. And what we'll do is we'll specify our props as React Date Picker props. And because the props are all optional inside here, then it's telling us that the name could possibly be undefined. And what we'll do is we'll use the bang operator to tell our component that we know this is going to have a name property. So we're just telling it to relax its null constraint rule for this particular property. So once again, we'll also need to bring in the helpers from use field, because we're going to want to set the field itself manually using the helpers as we did for the selected property. And what we'll do inside our date picker is we'll spread the field properties, and we'll also spread the props that we get from the React Date Picker props. And then what we can do is we can specify selected, and we're effectively overwriting what's going on in the props here when we do this. And we'll say selected, and then we'll say field.value. And if we have something in the field value, then we're going to specify new date and pass in the field.value. And if we don't have anything in the field value, then we're just going to set this to null. And then what we need to do is specify the onChange event, and we'll pass in value, and we'll say helpers.setValue and pass in the value. And we can keep our validation the same. So not especially tricky. I probably overestimated the trickiness to actually make use of this. One thing I will point out is that the date picker uses the JavaScript date object. That's why we're using new date here. And it doesn't use the string that we've been using so far for our dates. What this means is we're going to need a date strategy in our application, because when we start using this, everywhere that we've specified a date, we're going to run into an error. But we'll take a look at that very shortly. What we'll also need to do is add the CSS for React Date Picker into our index.tss. So we'll go there next. And what we'll do is we'll just add yet another style sheet in here, and we'll say import React Date Picker /dist/React Date Picker.css. And then what we'll do, we'll go back to our activity form, and we'll replace our date input here, and we'll specify my date input. Now this takes different properties to the ones we've been using so far, and what we'll do is I'll just reformat this slightly because we're going to need to pass a few properties in here. And instead of placeholder, the date input takes placeholder text. The name stays the same. What we're also going to do is say show time select, so that we show the time picker. We'll give it a time caption, and we'll set this equal to time, and we'll specify a date format, and we'll set this equal to MMM, M for a long month, D, followed by a comma, and then YYYY, followed by a space, then H:MM, and then AA for the AM or PM. And we're getting a warning here telling us that property onChange is missing in type, and this is down to our date inputs. Now all of these properties are optional, or most of them are, but some of them are obviously not, and that's why we're getting the error here. And if we take a look at the onChange, then this is a required property. Now we don't want to pass the onChange event from our date input in the activity form. So what we'll do, we'll go back to my date input, and we want to make all of the properties inside here optional. And one way we can do that is by making this a partial type. And if we say partial, we effectively make every single property in there optional, including the onChange. Because we don't need to pass that as a prop, because we've got it inside our date picker we're using directly. And if we go back to the activity form, now we can see that that error has gone away based on that particular change. So if we go across to our browser, then we're going to start to see problems here. Let's just try and refresh the page. We may still see some issues, but nope, this has actually loaded to my surprise. But what we should see is that we've got our date picker available now, and we can select it. However, the styling isn't quite right. I'd rather this stretch across the full width of the page. So what we'll do, we'll just head back to VS Code, and we'll open up our styles.css. And just inside here, what we'll do is we'll add some styles for the date picker. So what we'll do is we'll say React-date picker, and we'll target the wrapper in this case. So React-date picker-wrapper, and then we're just going to set the width to 100%. And if we go and take a look at the effect of this, now we can see that this stretches across the full width of our page, and we can make a date selection there. And if we submit, then what we can see when we do submit is that we can now see that this date is no longer a string, and this is a JavaScript date object now. And this means we're going to need to deal with dates differently in our application, and we'll take a look at how we're going to look at dates next.